Hi, everybody. Welcome to our webinar. I see you guys joining. Thank you for being here today with us as we talk with our webinar partner today, Una Solutions. We have Doug and Dr. Crystal Miller on the call today. I'm excited to get into the conversations we're going to have. I'm going to give it a few minutes. We have quite a few people registered, so we'll wait for a little bit so people can start to join. If you wouldn't mind, while we're waiting, give us a use that chat and let us know where you're dialing in from. I am in beautiful northern Michigan. It is a balmy 62 degrees today, so but the sun is shining, so I'm super happy about that. Doug, how about you?
Oh, it's nice here. Sun is
Yep.
shining, a little chilly.
Okay.
Temperature is supposed to drop about the same.
Yeah.
Yeah, but also sun's out, guns
Yeah.
out. Pretty
Exactly.
happy.
Yeah, exactly. I know. I'm just happy the sun is out. That makes me smile for sure. Oh, goodness. All right. Northern Nevada, Seminole. Oh, all the way in Florida. You're probably really warm down there, John. That is one nice thing. Like I will say, sometimes I really wish it was a little bit warmer up here, but like I am not all about, 90 degrees every day. Like I just can't do that.
Yeah, I love the heat. I grew up way up north, and I don't know. I've gone soft. Like
Yeah,
being down south, it's like I don't ever want to go back to
I
that.
know. I know. I feel that too. All right, well, why don't we go ahead and get started? For those of you who don't know me, my name is Michelle. I'm part of the TribalHub team here, and we are together today for a webinar hosted by Una Solutions called Data from Data to Decision, Building a Data-Empowered Tribal Government. Really excited to get into this conversation today. Um, while you are here and listening to our speakers, just a reminder to think about a couple of the learning objectives that this webinar will bring about. Number one is how to connect strategic planning, budgeting, and performance data into a unified, actionable roadmap that really aligns with tribal values and community voice. And the learning objective number two is to learn about how scenario planning and real-time data can help your organization prepare for economic shifts, funding changes, which you know are happening like all the time, and operational disruptions before they happen. So just a few things to keep in mind. While we are on the call today, we please make sure that you send in your questions. We are here. We want to make this interactive. So if you're thinking of something and you're like, gosh, I really want to know that, put it in the chat. If you don't want to put it out for everyone to see, you can use that Q&A feature on the bottom, which is usually under the More button, which is a little circle with the three dots. Pop that Q&A up and that question will just go right to us and we'll make sure that that gets answered. We're gonna go through the presentation, have a quick Q&A, and tomorrow you will get an email that has a copy, or I'm sorry, a link that will take you to this recording. So if there's someone on your team who couldn't make it today, make sure you share that with them. And I think that's all for my little housekeeping little notes. And so Doug, I'm going to turn it over to you to start our presentation.
Okay, well, thank you so much, everybody, for joining. We're really excited to meet with you all today. And I know data to decisions is kind of nebulous, but I just want to kind of set a little context around that because is it data to decisions or is it decisions to data? Today, we're going to talk about a few things, and we might have some technical folks here, some leadership folks here, maybe even some finance people, whatever your role is, like we're going to talk today about systems. And I just want to caveat, me and Dr. Miller were talking about this, is like systems, although what we do are software tools that definitely help with strat planning, budgeting, finance, procurement, grant management, stuff like that. Like I want to more kind of dial back and talk about systems just in the context of like processes, documented like operating procedures, and ways that the tribe and its employees can collaborate and communicate together more effectively. Because we're going to get into a conversation about this and just talk about kind of how high level you want to kind of build a structural foundation. And that's why I'm really excited to just introduce myself, I guess, but more importantly, Dr. Miller here, and have a nice little chat. So please jump in if you have any questions or feedback. We're going to have a Q&A section at the end. But yeah, without further ado, I'll introduce myself first. So my name is Doug Paget. Anishinaabe, Ojibwe. I'm an enrolled member of the Lactamalak First Nation, and I lead our tribal nation team here at Una Solutions. It's an honor to be here. I just share that because it informs my worldview and my passion to host you all here today, amazing tribal leaders. And with that, I'll also introduce Dr. Crystal Miller, who is the CEO of Sovereignty First, also a winner of the top 40 under 40 recently awarded at the Reservation Economic Summit. I don't know, Crystal, if you want to like jump in and just do a quick intro yourself, uh, I would
Yeah,
love
I
that.
can. Yeah, kicking it right off. As Doug mentioned, my name is Dr. Crystal Miller. I'm an enrolled citizen of the Walker River Paiute tribe, which is located in northern Nevada. I'm not too close to home, but I am calling in today from northern Nevada as well too. But I am the CEO of Sovereignty First Native Consulting Firm. I actually launched a firm probably about 2 years ago. As I was exiting out of my PhD program and entering into the workforce, I through my research and lived experience as well too, saw that there was a gap in tribal communities and tribal nations on instituting and implementing good governance, and what does that look like as we also incorporate traditional governance structures. And so I kicked the firm off about 2 years ago, and I've been doing a lot of governance reform ever since.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Let's just make sure everyone can see it here. So kind of just starting the kickoff. Are we good? Can you see my screen?
Yep, looks good.
All right, thank you. Okay, so um, what we're going to cover today is the past, present, and future. So, the past being how kind of policy shaped the landscape, and good or bad has caused us as resilient Indigenous people to move forward into in through challenges, hard times, and ideally into a thriving community. And the present, which we're going to talk about tools and strategies that kind of match the current moment, and the future, like how to kind of build systems, processes, and leverage tools to go from being reactive to more proactive, where we can more effectively strengthen the communities that we're serving. Okay. So first off, um, policy shaped the landscape, treaties and self-determination built the framework that tribes operate in today. It's a remarkable, some of the accomplishments, despite all the odds of, how we've gone from where we came from to where we are today. Lots of things happening, as you all know, across tribal governments, healthcare, education, the overall tribal indigenous economy, and much, much more. Um, so yeah, we want to kind of set the context there, when it comes to kind of what you're thinking about today and what we're thinking about and what we want to talk about. So with that, I thought that we could kind of kick it off with a question for you, Dr. Miller, is just, tribes are often in reactive mode. Sometimes, like what we've seen, they might be behind in audits, there could be turnover, people wearing many hats, struggling behind the scenes. And of course, this isn't just unique to tribes, it's similar in public sector, in nonprofit, but just curious, in the work that you do, what does it look like when you first come into a tribe? Can you talk about, your experience with, when you first start out, and someone brings you on board to help, like what does that look like?
Yeah, thanks, Doug. So oftentimes when I'm being brought in or asked to assist in certain ways, there's kind of this stigma around this idea for creating or having better management. And I always frame it of it's more than just needing or there's a necessity for having better management. Tribes have to understand that there's a lot of tribal governments that are actually operating inside of systems that weren't designed for this long-term nation building structure in the first place. It wasn't designed for these nations, regardless if they're in the US or Canada, to be excelling and succeeding long term. And so many are carrying generations of underfunding. There's a lot of federal dependency structures because of historical policies that have been imposed on them. There's staffing shortages, and even higher rates of staffing shortages for rural communities as well, too, to which also play a large role in um, historical federal policy that has removed tribes. And so there's a lot of history that kind of incorporate the reason or the why for this better management, and also for the why we should be looking at it in a different way. I oftentimes see political instability, and so maybe leadership is changing often, or the governance systems don't support the long-term employment, whatever the case is. But there's a true understanding that a lot of the times when I come into these communities, into these nations, that these systems, they're imposed and they're not actually rooted in traditional governance values, and so it doesn't allow for tradition and practice to kind of carry on long term. And so when people ask why tribes are stuck in this reactive mode, um, typically my answer isn't that it's because it's more so because it's structural, not because it's a personnel or a personal failure. And so while I'm in there and while I'm doing this work, I often focus on how can we shift from this reactive to this proactive realm. And it really starts with capacity and stability building. And I always say that we have to create and build the workforce development from the inside out, because nobody from the outside is coming to save us, for one. Two, we don't want them to save us. And three, we understand that we have lifelong employees almost in every single reservation because they are from our nation and they're not going anywhere. And so we have to foster that. But in the process of doing that, it also means that we have to have clear governance structures. For me, in the work that I do, that often means updated constitutions or updated codes. If there's no constitutions, understanding how the governance works and how does everything else underneath it flow. And then how do I build those structures long term? It incorporates a lot of strategic planning and this long term thinking. It's called nation building, moving away from the standard approach where we're just functioning on these short term cycles. So when I do strategic planning, it's often extends far beyond any election cycle, any funding cycle. And then it also ensures or takes into consideration that there has to also be a strong administrative system that supports it, a strong financial accountability, and enough staffing so that way people are not wearing five hats at once. I know that if you work for a tribal community or come from a tribal community, that probably hits home for you, the five hats at once. And we have to, I know that sometimes it's the case where we have to do what we have to do to get by. But if we're thinking long term, wearing five hats at once is never going to be sustainable. So keeping that in mind, if that is the process to which we have to get to sustainability long term, then that is the road that we'll take. But just know that that shouldn't be the end goal. Which also means that investing in institutional memory, and then that institutional knowledge. So tribal governments are not rebuilding from scratch every single time we have a new administration, or every single time we have somebody who moves on, or anytime there's turnover. That we should have a process, to which this is where the data comes in, a process, data, and information housed somewhere, archived somewhere, so that way the institutional knowledge is retained and not taken with the individual. Yeah, I don't know if you want to jump in, Doug. I know that's a big one for you.
That's amazing. Yes, thank you so much. Like, so yeah, and I'm not a governance expert or necessarily a policy expert, but I do understand that, yeah, you want to have like that strong framework in place too, because usually when people come to us, they're kind of already built something, at least to get started in that. And we certainly do get a lot of questions of, hey, we built this strategic plan and it kind of we went off track. Like, how do we connect that to our actual systems and tools? And it could be, like obviously our software supports that, but we, even recommend that if you're not there yet and ready for a software tool, I mean, consider things like take the strategic plan, take those goals and initiatives, and can you tie those to your cost centers, even if they're inside your Excel spreadsheet, so that you can kind of track what your goals and KPIs and metrics are that you're trying to achieve across maybe leadership as a whole or individual programmatic goals and outcomes you're trying to accomplish, and connecting those to the dollars that are funding those programs and staff. So we do get questions like, often a strategic plan ends up in a filing cabinet somewhere and kind of forgotten about, and then new leadership comes in, they don't even know where to find that in the filing cabinet. I don't know if this rings a bell, Crystal, but we do get a
Yeah.
lot of feedback on that. Like, how do we kind of keep it alive? And then, of course, I see an opportunity too. If I'm new leadership coming in, the first thing I want to do is be like, where's all the information? Where's the strategic plan? Where are we at with finances? What were the previous administration's goals? Because maybe they had some really good ideas that we actually just want to continue. And then, how can we access information from our directors of the different departments or programs? So yeah, just in general, like we get approached for, like how can we more effectively build a data empowered government? And that could start today with the tools that you have now. So I don't know, that's my thoughts. Like anything you can add to that with regards to like strategic plans, keeping them alive?
Yeah, I do say that often you'll have multiple different administrations who, I mean, quite frankly, you could build upon those strategic plans and you don't have to duplicate the effort, or you just modify the effort. And then also, you don't have to spend money on all of these different strategic plans. But I see it too often where there is no centralized place that data is stored within tribal communities, and so that often is the case that that they don't recycle the information and they start from scratch every single time. And in reality, all it does is keep the tribal nation spinning its wheels instead of moving it forward. And so it actually kind of puts a clamp into this long term, not even just long term strategic planning, but this long term goal and the sustainability that tribal nations are rooting for. But one thing, I'm going to take it back just a little bit because you had mentioned strategic planning and KPIs and all these other different amazing tools. And so, when doing strategic planning, it's also important that and many of you know this, I'm sure, but I'd be remiss if I don't mention it. But when doing strategic planning, it's really important that the plan actually comes from community, especially within tribal nations, and that actually helps for the plan to be actualized within community, regardless of which administration kind of takes on the role of implementation. And the way that I do that, Doug, you flagged the KPIs. The way that I actually do and track data within my own work is I take away KPIs and I actually do CRIs. And so that way it's culturally informed. And so where maybe conventional strategic planning is very linear because it's created from like a Western lens or a Western framework. And so it only goes and sees one way forward. I actually do and create strategic plans based off of cultural relevant indicators. And when you do that, the ask and the want to move things forward come from community. And the reason why I flag that is not to put a plug in for Doug or to put a plug in for me. It's just because I want tribal nations to understand that the strategic planning, if it wants to be successful and move forward, it has to have the buy-in from the community. And the best way to have the buy-in from the community is actually creating them utilizing culturally relevant metrics that come from community. So I guess that's the only thing that I would add on that one.
I am so glad that you added that, and it's my first time hearing of a CPI, whether it's
CRI.
a CRI. Okay, because
Mm-hmm.
I thought of like instead of a KPI, I'm thinking like cultural progress indicator, community progress
Mm-hmm.
indicator. What is PRI? Or
So CRI would
or
be,
sorry, C.
so versus me chasing the number to meet a set goal of metric, I'm actually chasing the ask of community, which allows me to stay in community longer to see that ask
Mhm.
through. And that's where the success is measured, not necessarily measured on, oh, this KPI says I need to hit 50 X, Y, and Z within this quarter. And so I hit it. But then what I've only done is go into the community one time, left, and oftentimes, especially with non-natives who are doing this work, it kind of feels extractive or transactional
Mhm.
versus tracking it off of the cultural ask, the communal ask. So that way you stay in community to kind of see it through.
Yes. Okay. Now, apparently, we're going to derail this whole webinar. We're just going to talk about this because I absolutely love it. But okay, no, we will stay on track. But thank you so much for that because that's something we talk about all the time too. It's like community has needs, wants, desires that inform like them to basically elect the leaders that get elected. They run a platform, they promise community to deliver, they become the new leadership, and it's their job to deliver. And it's a big challenge and task. Like, how are we going to deliver on these things? How are we going to move things forward? And then not only having a plan and tracking outcomes and CRIs and community informed metrics, it's how do we track and manage that week to week, month to month, see how we're
Mm-hmm.
actually performing and delivering on those things, and then reporting on it,
Yeah.
saying
And
basically, this is what you wanted, and this is what we did, and this is what happened.
yeah. And it also takes away from the fact that I'm not saying that this is the case for anybody on the call, but it takes away the factor from maybe there's a power struggle in the administration change and versus saying, I'm not going to do this because this individual was the one who brought forward the strategic plan. It actually moves the focus to, well, the community crafted this plan. And so I should still move it forward.
Yes. Okay. Love that. Thank you so much. See, I knew I would get something out of this webinar too, so I appreciate that. One of the questions I actually got at a tribal net conference late last year in the fall was like, we were talking about building a data empowered government, and the question was like, how can we get senior officials to kind of do things differently and understand that change is needed, um, or people that might not be like savvy with the current state of affairs or like the current state of technology. How can we can kind of like get them on board? And I kind of like thought about that a lot because it really took me aback and developed this kind of concept that I would like to share is and everyone all knows this the same way our ancestors read the land, we must learn to read the data and read the information and understand the current state. Because in the past, pre-contact, we were a very thriving people. We were collaborative, community-based, knew how to read data from the land, of the land, to thrive from the land, understanding things, like, for example, the different seasons, the different migration paths with animals, how we would harvest and gather, the things that we needed to get through, not only to survive but to thrive really as communities. We had cultural things, we had song, dance, stories, we had information, we had our language, and so that's all information, that's all data, that's collaboration, that's a community coming together to work together as one. And so to just like in the past, we must learn how to do this today in a different world, in sometimes in a true world way, like we must become experts on this new landscape, and often that's a digital landscape, or it's a landscape that requires more sophisticated understanding of how systems, tools work, how even governance works, which Dr. Miller is an expert in, and from a past, present, and future lens, right? Like we have federal government, we might have businesses, we might we have lots of sophisticated programs that serve community. So it's a lot, but it can be managed and brought together where we can once again use tools and systems to kind of become that people that we were, just in a different way, in a more collaborative way, where technology sometimes, keeps people apart. It can also be used to bring people together. So just really want to kind of highlight that. And, the tradition really continues today. Like, when done right, with the right structure, with the right plan that's informed by community and actually managed and driven through to outcomes that you can kind of actually report on back to community and see results. We can do this today with the right data in the right hands at the right time. We can go from being reactive to proactive. So, it's important to lead with tech and lead with good governance, really good structures, and make sure everyone is aligned, not just from chief or chair and council, but from community through the leadership, through to, executives and directors of programs, programmatic leaders, all the way throughout front to back, because all the different people in the tribe are working towards one goal. So, with that, I thought I would ask Crystal, what's kind of like broken, what does good look like? I know this is a big question, but when you go into a tribe, say, to help with strategic planning and doing governance and structural work, what's usually broken, and how they're using data and information today, and what does it look like when they get it right? And maybe just for some context for us, I mean, we have people really eager to move towards software systems that can kind of do some of those things, but that I was just talking about, bringing everyone together, simplify, maybe introduce some automation and stuff, but they're actually not ready because they're 2 years behind, 3 years behind on audits. So that's kind of taking a priority. Totally understandable. But there could be a lot of other stuff, that you run into. Just curious what maybe that looks like for you.
Yeah, Doug, and if you don't mind, I'm just going to add on to something that you had said from the slide before when you were talking about data. One thing that I will mention before answering and jumping into this question is, yeah, right data, right hands, right time, is thinking about this proactively versus reactively. We know that when things are created without us in mind, or without us really kind of driving that car in the driver's seat, then there is that potential for it to be destructive or for it to be utilized against us negatively. I mean, my background is in governance and in good governance, really looking at traditional, contemporary, hybrid governance systems. And the first thing that popped into mind is, we've always said that we are going to exert our sovereignty, we're going to expand our self-determination, and we're going to do what we want because we're a sovereign nation. Now, the federal government, in actually almost 100 years ago now, kind of ran with that and implemented and adopted the Indian Reorganization Act that was designed to do just that. Now, that was designed to support self-determination and all of these other great things that we had been asking for, but it was designed without us, and actually turned around and became a detriment to us and how we see through traditional governance. Now, think about data, especially in this time and space, in that same exact position. We have the ability to jump on board, create these systems for ourselves, or let them write it for us. And is that going to be extractive? Is that going to be positive? Is it going to force us into another 300 years of reactive state? And those are the kind of things that we should be thinking about and have in mind. Now, going back to the question of the gaps, there's probably a lot. We could talk about this all day long. You're right. That
No,
was a
I'm so
loaded
grateful.
question.
So grateful for you to add that, because it's like keeping in mind those things, like when you're actually in a position like Indigenous organizations are in a position to take leadership across the board in all industries and have an opportunity to kind of create and co-create what all of this looks like. And it could, empowering tribes to move forward in a new way that is built for them.
Mhm. Yeah,
And
so
it's intentional, right?
yeah, it is extremely intentional. And so we always say we want to be on the right side of history. And we've always, for the most part, been on the right side of history, but it also means writing our own history. And as data and a lot of different things around data. I mean, you talk about data centers, that's a whole nother topic, but it houses data. We just want to be proactive and get on the right side of that.
Absolutely. So yeah, actually the question was the right what's broken and what good looks like. I mean, I guess, you kind of also did address that in that, let's kind of what good looks like is something that's built for us by us.
Hmm.
And, you know, um anything else that you can maybe add to that?
Yeah, I'm gonna. Usually, I would take the diplomatic answer, but I'm not.
Go for
So
it.
I guess one of the biggest challenges that I see often is a lot of times tribal governments are overwhelmed with information, but that doesn't mean that they don't want it. They're 100% starving for usable knowledge. And so where and why I say that is because I think there's a language barrier. And I don't say that because tribal nations don't speak English across the board or don't speak the common language across the board. I just think that we're not thinking about the systems that we've had since time immemorial in the same way that the common language is thinking about them. And so I say that to say that data exists everywhere. And I think that the understanding that we've always had it and that it's not a new concept to us is something that a lot of tribal nations um, should be aware of. I mean, spreadsheets are data, filing cabinets are housing data, grant reports are housing data. We have um, the strategic plans that we talked about earlier, those consultant studies, those are housing data. We get audits. You mentioned audits. Some tribes may be behind in audits, but that houses data. And all of these different things are just
Conversations are data.
conversations are data. Yes, there's data happening around us all the time, but I don't think that we think about it in that context. And so when I say a language barrier, it's not that we all don't speak English or Canada, we all don't speak French where applicable. It's just that we're not thinking about it in the same way. And so, in many cases, information is managed reactively instead of strategically in tribal nations. And it is the case that we see often data gets collected because somebody else says you have to do it. A federal agency requires it, or a grant application says that you need it, or whatever the case is, a crisis has forced you to create and hold this data. But there's often no clear system around who actually owns it. And that's a big thing around data sovereignty. There's no conversation or understanding on how it, or where it's going to be stored or who can share it. Can we share it? I'm bringing a cultural sense into this now. Can we share it at certain times of the years? I'm really looking at when maybe some tribes. I just had a conversation last week. A tribal elder was sharing knowledge with me, but said, when that snow melts, I can't talk to you about this anymore. So those things are important. And they may flow into some of your day to day operations or they may not, but those are just things to consider. And then there brings up the big conversation again about this institutional knowledge. And so institutional knowledge typically leaves with staff turnover in a lot of tribal nations. And it is because we're not having those internal conversations about who owns the information, how are we going to store it, how or when does it get shared, and then also what are our tribal priorities that are being informed because of these things. And so it is the case in a lot of scenarios that I've seen that one person may retire or resign, and then suddenly years of history or process and decision making disappears with them. Another issue that I see oftentimes is that many tribal governments are operating with administrative systems that are built around them, really looking at compliance instead of nation building. And so I'm looking at, and this is where I had kind of name dropped earlier, is there's this standard approach and there's this nation building approach. And within this standard approach is where this lives. And so we're creating data, but we're really only holding and housing things and creating this visibility for the 1 year fiscal or financial cycle. Or maybe the grant says you have 2 years to expend these funds. So the only thing that I'm looking at is within those 2 years, and I'm not looking any further.
Right.
And really looking and moving into that nation building approach, I'm looking at 20 to 50 years down the line, and whatever fits into that fits into that. But my goal is there. It is the case that oftentimes tribal nations focus only on that 1 to 2 year funding cycle, and that is where their goals end. And then it's just, oh, well, I'm going to pick this to keep this program going. I'm going to pick this to keep this program going. And oftentimes the goalpost sways because they're not really looking at this long-term goal.
Right.
And then within that as well, too, I don't know if you want me to pause for a second and kind of take that in.
Well, no, I think you were going to say within that. I think
Yeah,
you should
yeah,
continue because it is similar to like where we're going with this anyway. So
yeah.
I love it.
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
good. So within that, though, brings the again the conversation around leadership. And so because of those things, leadership, they may not always have a complete picture of these governance gaps because they're not seeing that data, or they don't understand or know what the land use priorities are or the community needs. What are the housing conditions? Are there different trends like economic trends that we're seeing or we're not seeing? Are there gaps there? Are there any infrastructure challenges or long-term strategic goals because the information is kind of scattered across the department? You want to know one thing, you go to the housing department. You want to know something else, you go to environmental department. And they're not sharing data collectively to kind of understand the full holistic picture. And they're really locked inside this siloed system. And so then you had asked the question also, what does it look like when you get it right? So really looking at what does that look like, and every tribe's going to be different. So there's not one answer, but there could be a themed one that maybe we see 80% or one tribe has one, and then 80% of it works for another, and 60% works for another, and we just kind of piece it together. But where I see success is where information becomes really a governance tool instead of just an administrative burden. We shouldn't get upset because we have to collect data or we have to house data in a way that it's accessible kind of across the board, regardless if it's administration or if it's our youth who want to know more. Whatever the case is, it must be accessible to community. But also, in the same sentence, leadership has to have access to this particular data across the board, and it has to be reliable, it has to be accessible, and it has to be organized information that supports these proactive decision making. And so that means that departments have to communicate with each other. Strategic plans, really looking from a holistic lens, have to connect to the budgets or they have to connect to the policies. Or maybe you have this long-term goal to implement and institute more infrastructure. And so those strategic plans also have to tie into the infrastructure planning and the community priorities, as well as the nation's goals. And so some of the strongest tribal governments that I've worked with are really the ones who have built these particular systems that preserve this institutional knowledge beyond administration cycles, beyond individual staff members. And they're really the ones who have created this clear data governance policy that's protected sensitive community information. It's improved internal coordination between everybody, leadership, government, different departments, everybody that needs to be working together is really
Yes.
coordinating internally. And then also, I guess the last thing that I'll leave with is that um, what was that?
Oh, keep going.
Oh, okay, sorry. The last thing that I'll leave with is that no department is fully dependent or independent in that it really requires everybody to work together. For me, I really think about it as a traditional practice in itself. And that way we no longer have these silos. We're not working
Mhm.
independently. Everybody is coming together for that long-term goal.
Love it. Yeah, that is one thing that I got excited about when you were talking about it because it sounds more like an indigenous community from a traditional perspective, but more in a modern context.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone's aligned, everyone's, and it's more inspiring. I've heard this before too. when we're wearing many hats, when we're bogged down and we're busy, it's easy to forget why we're doing the work that we're doing. But when you
Mm-hmm.
have one of those stronger nations that are focused on nation building, like you said, everyone across the board knows the vision. They understand why they're doing it. They are driven together, working together, and it's a more exciting kind of place to work, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
to kind of be in that alignment is incredible. And if you do forget, like, oh man, I'm kind of buried in some work today, but like you remember, like, hey, this is work that's really driving the needle forward on those goals that are driven by community and supporting community. So I really appreciate that. You even reminded me of something that I know from our First Nation, like that's really important and built throughout is for projects, just a general project methodology takes is informed by a cultural approach of birth. Like first of all, do we want to do we even want to have a child? Like, and yes, the answer is maybe we do. Okay, well, what's that gonna look like? Leading up to through the pregnancy, what's going to happen, every step of the way there, and, wrapping people around that mom, that woman, and then what happens afterwards, and just kind of like flash forward, like thinking about the whole life of this child, like, and making sure it's going to have support front to back, and then maybe even doing like what we do is like shake a tent ceremony and things like that to have it informed by creator and just blessed and everyone's aligned, all the different people um before we even begin. So that is
Mm-hmm.
like, and I probably kind of didn't explain it as well as some of my the people that actually work for Lac First Nation have explained it, but the idea is how do we kind of take that methodology and apply it to like projects that we take on? Like, do we want to even do this? What does it look like,
Yep.
before we
Yep.
even begin? And what does it look like throughout, after, and we don't take anything on unless we do this thought process, cultural process, and apply it. And guess what? There's never been a failed project at our First Nation, because we don't take anything on that we don't understand and review front to back in the first place. So
Mm-hmm.
you reminded me of that and inspired me to kind of want to share a little bit about that too.
Yeah, and it also helps too when you have culturally relevant systems in place as well too with some of the things that we haven't talked about today. Like when you're talking right now, I was thinking about conflict resolution. So how do I implement traditional conflict resolution into some of these things? Because maybe not everybody's aligned all the time, but there's a way forward and a pathway forward. And the fact that we've been governing ourselves and implementing informally these systems since time immemorial, I think it just speaks to the fact that we have the answers internally and we just need to implement them the way that we always have.
Thank you so much. I'm loving this conversation. So kind of getting close to the end here and wrapping up. Um, there's policy change and there's impacts to tech there, which everyone knows. It could. It's not just an impact to tech. The present day's demands are require more collaborative solutions and more collaborative people. So I could just see where there's a benefit when the whole nation is aligned to the community vision, which we're just talking about. So we kind of like covered some of this, but any kind of closing thoughts, where to start, if you're if someone was curious on this call or watching this recording, like what would be some advice on where to start, like based on your experience?
I guess for me, my foundation and all the work that I do is in sovereignty. So I'm always thinking about how can I protect sovereignty? or expand it in the work that I do. And so it is probably on par that I'm going to say that tribal citizens and tribal leaders should start by treating information as a sovereignty asset and kind of remove this mindset that it's really just an administrative requirement. And so when we look at it as a tool to protect or expand sovereignty, I think that that is the ultimate place to start. What I've seen kind of through the theme throughout the work that I've done is that these systems are often built around responding to these outside agencies, much like we talked about earlier, instead of really strengthening this internal governance and this long-term vision that we have for our nations. When we do this and we implement it in this way, even when we see maybe these funding priorities shift, like the United States has seen heavily within the past year, and even as administrations change or maybe programs disappear, the tribes that remain stable are usually the ones that are already understanding what their own needs are, understanding what their own assets and the risks and long-term priorities are, independent outside of these systems. And so I'd say the first step is being clear of what that picture is and what that vision is for your nation in long term, and really looking at data and data and information as an asset to sovereignty.
That's amazing. So data as an asset for sovereignty. I love that. A couple notes that I put down here that definitely align with that too, are planning ahead, understanding potential what if scenarios that you can actually get ahead of, especially, which is a lot easier to do when you build kind of systems around this and processes and just a general overall cultural understanding and benefit to sovereignty and to the community. And other systems, making sure you're always audit ready instead of scrambling,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Being less reactive and taking on projects that, you understand what it looks like front to back, and, have a wraparound model built to support it. Otherwise,
and I think also too, just gonna flag, so really thinking about this in contemporary times. And so we know every year an audit's going to come. And if we're thinking about 20 years, 50 years down the line, if we want to get to that end goal, we have to be prepared for all these little small milestones. And so it should be, we know it's coming and we're prepared, like you just mentioned, versus, oh man, it's the end of the year and the auditor's here again. And now I have to stop everything that I'm doing. So yes, that is another example of like moving from the reactive to the proactive with that long-term vision and goal.
I also wrote here telling stronger impact stories to community, to partners, to everybody. And I think we kind of touched on that too. It's like when you could actually have systems built around everything that we talked about today, from a cultural perspective, especially from community perspective, especially, and when you're tracking it and keeping everything alive throughout the year, weekly, monthly, and you have that strong nation focused on nation building and alignment and all those good things, in an ideal world, then it actually becomes easier to tell those stories and share information too, in a relevant way that matters to especially communities. So that was my closing thought. But what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's awesome, Doug. And I'll also mention too that a lot of the work that I've done, especially in this particular cross between nation building and governance, I think oftentimes really just looking at implementing the framework of just nation building in and itself, it is a good framework across the board. But when you do and implement these things that even you just mentioned right now about the community creating the story, or maybe we're addressing things that need to be addressed, to which I argue like a part of nation building is addressing those hard things and having those hard conversations. And maybe sometimes it's addressing historical trauma that's passed down to get to that common goal. I think that it's important that this is why I incorporate those CRIs, or why I say things have to come from community, because at the end of the day, that community is the only one who's going to have to lay their head in that community. And so those systems have to be built by them. And so having this full understanding about why data is so important and data should be seen from as a sovereign asset is probably one of the most important things that I was hoping to hit on today.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining us and just being a overall amazing person. I want to use the word BA, which is short for, but yeah, I'll keep it on the straight and narrow. Thank you just so much for joining us, Dr. Miller, today. And we want to hand it off to Michelle, and we're going to open up for Q&A if anyone has questions. And we're available. You can reach out to us at any time too, if you want to continue these conversations with Dr. Miller or myself.
Yeah, I will actually put your emails in the chat here, so if anyone wants to reach out. But we have a couple questions to get to in the next few minutes. The first one is, can you give us some examples of what some of the cultural relevant metrics would look like?
Yeah, so let me try to break this down generally without getting too specific, just because I also take data sovereignty extremely serious. So there was a time that I was working, and the KPI, the metric that I needed to hit was, and let's just say it was for a funder. The metric that I needed to hit was do 15 reforms or constitution drafting within 4 quarters. And so I was actually chasing the number versus chasing the impact from community. And so it felt almost as if I was going into community, being extractive, getting my numbers done, and then moving on to the next year. But in that practice, it didn't allow me to actually and truly consider, well, what is the ask from the community? Does the communities even want me to work on 15 different constitutions? Or do the communities even want me to work on 15 different policy briefs, whatever the case is? And so it was really chasing the number versus chasing the impact. And so within CRIs, what I do is any ask that comes from the community becomes a measurable metric. And so say the community has, let's just use this as an example. The community has governance issues or policy issues, and they don't have, in this case, the right rules. And so, but who gets to define what are the right rules? And so, in order to implement that CRI, I would have to, one, the ask came from the community, then go into the community and start understanding, well, what does the community want to see? What is the right rule, and how is it going to be most effective to be sustaining long term? And so that's where it shifts from I'm measuring the impact that allows me to stay in community to see that through versus measuring the number.
Yeah, that's really great. Hopefully, if that did not answer your question, or if you have a follow-up, just make sure to throw it in the chat or the Q&A. Next question. For tribal governments that are really still heavily reliant on, manual reporting, spreadsheets, throwing that policy or that contract in the filing cabinet, like you were talking about in the very beginning, what is a realistic first step that someone, could take to make this change?
I mean, I could jump in. I mean, as like on a most basic level, if you're using spreadsheets and you want to actually start to build in culturally relevant indicators, and I'm sorry if I ruin this, Dr. Miller, but I just keep thinking of culturally a cultural progress indicator, because I'm just used to that KPI thing. But yeah, you want to track and manage that, and I think putting it into a budget, even if that is a spreadsheet, like what are the outcomes you're looking to achieve in this program? If it's like police services, then community is asking for a more safe community, right? So you're gonna likely need to fund that. Maybe it's hire 2 more police officers. Maybe it's put in new lighting that brightens the community up at night to make people feel more safe and deter crime. Whatever it is, like you're kind of building those goals into the cost center level, and then tracking and managing incidents for example, or like if it's a housing program, you know, how many homes do you want to build a year? How many homes do you want to renovate? Maybe you have a goal of connecting internet to those homes. Like how many homes do you want to connect by the end of the year? Or maybe it's like a healthcare service or program that you want to deliver to the home too, and tracking and managing what those goals look like and what those specific indicators are,
Mhm.
and you know, and then having more visibility into it, like you know, having uh monthly meetings to talk about how you're progressing and then update those numbers. Okay, we did this last month. And now, and then if you see where I'm going with this,
Mhm.
you're starting to, on the micro level, build up information. And then by the time you get to the end of the year, time goes fast. We're almost halfway done this year.
Yeah.
You'll have a whole bunch of information that you didn't have before. So that's how I would recommend to start if you're working in that spreadsheet world. If you want to get out of that spreadsheet world, I think we can probably help too. But honestly, the most successful tribes that we've worked with have really started to get a handle on building up that foundational structure in the way things are being done today with the tools that they have. You don't need to always, you know, be getting some tool. Like it's good to get a tool, but it's really good to understand how you do things today and how you can improve things before you get the tool. So make sure you're ready. And there's no reason why you can't get started with what you got today.
Right. I love
Yeah,
that.
and I'll just add too as well. So when you have a clear idea and a clear understanding of where you're going, and Doug, you explained that extremely well, extremely well. But when you have a clear understanding and a clear idea of where you're going, you can also proactively implement some rules. Maybe you call them right rules on what you're willing to allow, what you're not willing to allow, what you're willing to budget or to budge on whatever the case is. And so, why I say that, I'm thinking about this time that I worked with a tribe, and we had kind of went in and looked at, well, what is the CR? So, what is the ask coming from the community? And I'm going to focus on the youth who spoke. So, the youth started throwing out things like, in 50 years, I want a Starbucks, I want a brand new school, I want this. And so we kind of themed that. And so what they're actually asking for is economic development, infrastructure, and all of these other different things that we themed together. So then we were able to create, okay, well, what is the process or the protocol for us to get these things? And when they start coming, when we start building, because there's infrastructure, is there another rule that we're going to implement because we want to keep our cultural sites or sacred areas protected? And so then we can proactively adopt a protocol, or maybe it's an authority board who oversees what can and can't be done within that tribal nation. So those are kind of mechanisms that can be instituted early on to be proactive as you're kind of seeing through your long-term goal.
Hmm. Yeah, that's really great. Okay, good. I see, Doug, that you answered Fred's question there, so that's great.
Yeah.
Um, I
Was
have
that
really enjoyed this conversation. I can hear both of your passion coming through, and that just makes such a huge difference. And I love seeing that, and I'm so glad that we were able to share that with everybody who was on the call today and everyone's who's going to watch this, video in the future. So, yeah, it's great. We appreciate Una Solutions being a Tribal Hub associate member. Looking forward to seeing you guys in person at TribalNet soon. Any last words before we end the call today?
I just thank you again, and I hope we answered that question for Fred. It was a really good question. What do we mean by
Yeah.
community? And we literally mean the community as a whole, like all the citizens, where they're
Within that tribal
enrolled.
nation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the whole nation, which often are the people like who also are doing work and hired by the government or any of the other entities that the tribal government has, the tribal nation has. So hopefully we answered it.
Yeah. Amazing.
And and if you have any additional questions, feel free to reach out.
Yes, I put both of your emails in here, and I will also include them in the email that we send out too, in case anybody missed it. So, again, thank you guys so much. Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Dr. Miller, and thank you everybody who attended. Make sure to look for your email tomorrow for a copy of this recording so you can share it out with anybody who missed it. And with that, you guys have a great rest of your afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.